My career started as a journalist. I worked for the BBC since I was about 20 years old. I'd always wanted to work in the BBC, be a broadcaster, although I read law at university, but that was my dad's idea. He wanted something a bit more secure for me, but it was my passion. So I started in local radio and then into network. I worked for Radio 5 Live, for Radio 4, and the biggest shows I worked for were the Today programme, broadcasting to 6 million listeners every day, setting the news agenda, interviewing some extraordinary people, and then Women's Hour, also one of the big flagship programmes for Radio 4. And the only other option really for me was to work on the Archers, and then I would have had all three. But I was getting pretty fed up at the BBC by that point, and I discovered this new profession of coaching. We had someone on one of the shows that I was producing who was a coach, and I thought, that's brilliant, I'd love to do that. So at the time, the biggest coach training organisation was called Coach University, based in the States, and it was a sort of 2.5 year programme. A lot of people were taking it at that time, and it was about that time that the International Coach Federation was set up as well, and Coach U was accredited. So it seemed to me, I had a law degree from a top university, and I'd had a career as a journalist for a top organisation, and why would I compromise and not do the same thing for my coach training? So that was initial, and that was the sort of the foundations. But I think that most of what I know about leadership has come from working with leaders, actually listening to them, actually working through issues with them. I can go in for a day, 2 days to a company, but my company tends to hang around for 18 months, 6 months to 18 months. So we really get to understand the challenges, the day-to-day challenges of being a leader, and then you absorb all of that and you bring that into your next job. Change is really, really difficult for organisations. I think companies aren't really built for change. Most organisations that I work with are structured along kind of industrial age lines. They are hierarchical. Everyone has solid reporting lines. They're organised into teams. They're expected to be there from, say, 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're not expected to leave until 5:30 in the evening, maybe longer. Kind of like working in a factory, kind of like a production line. That's really an outdated model, and I worry that companies who are really committed to that way of running their business, I worry that they're not going to be able to cope with the changes that are going on in the world that are affecting their businesses. The fact that people don't operate in stagnant teams anymore, that they operate in lots of different, there's a matrix, they're in lots of different teams, they've got dotted lines and solid lines. People don't respect the hierarchy, they're not hugely impressed by status and seniority, so that hierarchy doesn't really work. So when you're trying to change that, you're not just trying to change a few systems and processes, you're trying to change a whole mindset, and that's really difficult. So it has to start from the top. I do believe in bottom-up change. I think that everyone in the organisation needs to get it, and the ideas about how this is going to work will probably come from the middle and lower ends of the business, because they're the ones that are working every single day, kind of cranking the machine. But you need to have the commitment from the top, that the CEO and the board and the top 100, top 250 leaders have got to recognise that they have to change their behaviour. They have to start listening. They have to let go of their ego. They have to be people who are true to their word. They need to be honest. They need to be vulnerable. All these things that go against probably everything that got them to where they are today. And that's where it has to start. I have to sense that there is a willingness to do that before I will really believe that the company can change. I think that change is ongoing now. I don't think there's ever a point where a company can say, all right, we've been through a change program, we're stable now. If anything, I would say that the only role for leaders, I mean, the definition to me of leadership is people who drive change. If your organisation doesn't need to change, you don't need leaders. If you just imagine you've got leaders and followers, if the leader's not going anywhere, then you don't need anyone following. So the definition to me is that leaders bring about change, leaders drive change in their organisations. Otherwise, it's fine for them to just to do management. That's what keeps the machine ticking over, and that's fine if you're not going anywhere. But I think that everybody's industry is changing so much. You know, you've got disruptors coming up your blind side all the time. And if your industry hasn't been disrupted yet, it's going to be. We're seeing all sorts of interesting, whole new business models emerging now. So there really isn't any room for complacency. Change is an absolute constant. And if, you know, leaders can invest in all sorts of development for themselves, communication skills and the ability to give feedback and all of that. But actually, if there's one thing that they need in order to do their jobs, it's to have a lot of change muscle, to be really robust about their own response to change, to be comfortable with that, or to know that they are comfortable with the discomfort. One of the biggest surprises I got when I started working with senior people was that they all were waiting to be found out. And very few of them felt that they deserved to have achieved that position. And I actually found it very reassuring, because I have the same thing. I remember when I was a journalist on the Today programme, and I had to go to 11 Downing Street. I was going to be interviewing the Chancellor. I was going to be meeting various ministers. And I went in and I did my interviews and I mingled, and then I came out of Downing Street and I called my mum and I said, it was amazing. No one realised I was 12 years old. You know, because I had felt like a 12-year-old dressed up as an adult, and that at any point someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, little girl, you shouldn't be in here. So it's really reassuring to find that so many people feel that way. In the past, I would have helped, at the very beginning of my career, I would have helped leaders to find ways to overcome that sense of being a fraud, that they're going to be found out any moment, that they don't really know what they're doing. I think that my approach has evolved a bit. Now, I really don't think that most CEOs know what they're doing. I mean, and not because they're rubbish, but because who knows what they're doing. I mean, if they're really trying to do something new and fresh, then they're doing something they've never done before. And if they're doing something the same way as they did it 5 years ago, because that's how they know how to do it, it's probably out of date. So of course they have fraud syndrome, because they actually don't know what they're doing. And it would be far better to be honest about that. So no one wants to be led by an idiot, and it's not about saying, I really don't have a clue what I'm doing. It's not about that, but it's about saying, look, my experience has got me to this position, but we're about to do something that we've never done before, and I have ideas about that, and some of my ideas are going to be very good. But I need everyone else's ideas too, and let's do this together. So this idea of being a fraud, rather than being a dirty secret, can be something that really helps you to engage other people and to connect with them and to get them involved in changing the business, making the business better. Leaders should be always taking risks. I think we've become really risk averse. I think, you know, since the recession, companies have started being run by FDs. And nothing wrong with FDs. They play a really important role, but they have their eye on a particular thing, which is their Excel. I mean, which is, how did we perform last month? How did we perform in the last quarter? How does this quarter this year compare with the same quarter last year? You know, are we steadily rising? They are, by their nature, typically, there are exceptions, but they are trained to be risk averse. So when that's the only voice that matters, then of course companies play it safe. And if you just look at companies that are succeeding now, these disruptors, they're not playing it safe. I mean, they are really taking massive risks. Zappos in America is an online retailer. They've just scrapped all their managers. They've got rid of managers. I just saw a funny YouTube film this morning of them making fun of themselves. A little film of everybody screaming, I can't do my work because I don't have a manager to tell me what to do. And people sitting around on their phones and we don't know what to do because there's no managers. Of course, it's ridiculous. Everyone's getting on with it. The company's doing really well. But it's a risk. They don't have anyone else that they can look at and say, oh, this is how you do it. They're making it up as they go along. They may end up reintroducing management in future, but based on their learnings. And I think that you've got to take risks. You've got to trust your instincts, be a person of conviction, and then live with the consequences. And the thing that I've always thought is better to trust your instincts and be wrong than not trust your instincts and be wrong. Because at least you can live with that. I did what I thought was best and it didn't work out. It's very difficult to live with, I didn't do what I thought was best and it failed. So much better. Now, of course, you've got people working for you. You've got to think about them, the impact on them. You've got to think about the impact on customers. Of course, you've got to balance all of that up. But if you're only doing things where, you can't guarantee an outcome. Either way. So you might as well go with what you think, go with those instincts and tweak, what I call bug fix, tweak it as you go. So sometimes 45 minutes or an hour is the slot, and it's a speech with a little bit of Q&A, and that's pretty typical. Sometimes the event organisers want something more. They want, often rightly so, they want to not just have this stuff wash over people, but actually give people the opportunity to reflect on what it means. In that case, I can work with them to design whatever it is that's going to bring that about. So we've done things in the past like breakout sessions where, let's say they're sitting cabaret style, so they're on tables anyway. I set them a question to think about. And it could be a very generic question like, of all the things that I've talked about in the presentation, which is the one that you think would have the biggest impact on your organisation? If you were leading that, what would you do? So then they have a little discussion and we can hear about that. Or it could be something significantly more involved. I have a team in my company, a team of facilitators who are really exceptional coaches and really at the cutting edge of all of this stuff around leadership. I can bring them in and we can do real breakouts where we really get under the skin of what's going on in the business and what needs to change. We do exercises where we call it putting the smelly fish on the table. So it's the stuff that nobody really wants to talk about. It's the dirty secrets of the company, and we get all of that out, normally using Post-its. One of my favourite accessories is Post-its. Getting all of that stuff out and creating a big collage of these and starting to pull them into themes. And sometimes companies are worried about that because they think it's going to be negative. But actually, if you've got all that sitting there anyway, but you're trying to brainwash people into thinking, oh, it's all going to be brilliant, they don't buy the message. When you give them the opportunity to say, okay, what's going to get in our way then? What's going to stop us? This all sounds brilliant. This new strategy sounds great. The new brand looks amazing. I'm really excited to be part of the business. But there's stuff that's going to get in the way. And you give them the opportunity to express it. Then I think people really believe that you mean it. And we can definitely help with that. I think one of the things that people take away from the presentation is that they are normal. So I think people can feel quite isolated in their business and they can think that they're the only one that thinks that way. So they can think, I spend all my time just cranking the handle, well, surely I should be bringing about some change here. Surely it's hugely risky not to do that. Or they can think, I see these images of what a leader's supposed to look like, but I've sort of found that being close to my people and making connections with them and actually swallowing my ego a bit has worked better. And when they hear me from the stage talk about some of those things, and particularly when we get into the Q&A and people start talking about their experiences, I think they realise that to trust their instincts, that they're right. They're right, and that they're not alone. And not only are they not alone, but that there's a trend. There's change sweeping through organisations, and if my messages have resonated with them, then they're sort of on the right side of that change. So I think that they feel reassured and more confident to go back into their organisation the next day with a real commitment to doing something differently and to creating a community of leaders who are going to together do something different.